Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's your friend Rick from Blind, and today we're going to introduce you to Marta Munk de Alba, who's the former director of talent acquisition at Netflix across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. She actually joined Netflix to help set up the company's international expansion as it grew outside of the United States. In her role, she partnered with directors, vice presidents, and other executives to understand their business groups and provide strategic input regarding current and future staffing needs and organizational design. Marta has 20 years of experience in international recruitment in multinational and multicultural environments. Thanks for coming on the show, Marta.
Thank you very much. Very excited to be here, Rick and Jack, of course.
Well, that was a great introduction because it's amazing. Usually we'll speak more to US-based people, so I'd love to hear what's it like to build up the recruiting practice at Netflix in a whole lot of different countries. 'Cause to me, that seems amazing.
It's very fun. That's the first word that comes to mind, Jack. It's very fun and at the same time very challenging, as you might imagine. When I joined Netflix, there was just two people doing recruiting, my former boss, Alex, and myself, and we had to start everything from scratch, from the very, very basics of writing job descriptions that spoke to a European audience, in this case, to thinking about compensation in a different way, understanding each local market we recruited out from individually versus thinking about Europe as this, monolith. So it was very challenging because it was twofold. Us ourselves needed to learn all of these things for Netflix, and at the same time do a big job of educating our peers, leaders, and executives in the US for them to be able to build their organization internationally in an effective way. So a lot of fun, lots of challenges on the way, and lots of learnings, I would say, too, and mistakes. But yeah, we succeeded, I guess.
How is it different when you do it? So what countries did you cover? It was Europe.
So if we were headquartered, they are headquartered in Amsterdam. Doesn't mean the main market is the Netherlands. It's headquarters in Amsterdam, and in the beginning, for the first few years, Amsterdam served a little bit as the incubator of teams to then be sent to the local market. So we only had an office in Amsterdam and one smaller one in London for the first couple of years. And as the business grew, the company penetrated each market, mostly in Western Europe. We started opening local offices to a total of 12 or 13 offices that they have now. So to give you an example, with Spain, which was one of the first local teams we built, what we did is we hired the talent that from Spain. We identified the talent in Spain. We relocated them to Amsterdam. They spent a couple of years in Amsterdam. Those were cross-functional teams composed by, marketing functions, content functions, etc. And once the market was big enough to have a team on the ground, we sent them back to their original country, in this case, Spain, and in this case, to the Madrid office. So it was a very interesting evolution because teams were created in the headquarters and they could, experience and live kind of the culture and the whole entrepreneurship that was happening during those early years of the business in EMEA. We did that with 13 teams. There are still some teams in Amsterdam that don't have a local office, like, for example, the Middle East team. It's just a matter of, certain markets becoming a little bit more mature to then have the people on the ground. So that's how it worked. And it was interesting because every single person we hired, or almost every single person we hired, we had to relocate from their original country to Amsterdam.
So what are the challenges? Because to me, from the outside, and Rick, what do you think about this too? It seems there's a lot of challenges where you have all these different cultures, all these different countries, all the different languages, and you would have to be responsible for recruiting, building the infrastructure for all these different places. How are you, how are you able to manage all that? That seems like a lot of things under your belt.
Yes, it is, but that's one of the things that I find most exciting of the job I did there and at Booking and previously on the agency side. I think working for such a big and diverse region as EMEA, that includes 3 continents, makes it very, very exciting, right? You need to deal with different languages, cultures, time zones, currencies, everything, right? So I think the way you do that is, well, first you need to learn, right? I think I learned most of that at Booking, where I had a really big portfolio of countries to recruit in. And then when I was hired at Netflix, I think one of the reasons why I was hired at Netflix was specifically because of this, because I had acquired the understanding of the different markets. I am no expert in every single country from the EMEA region, but I kind of have an idea of the talent market and job market in all of these countries. So I came into Netflix with that knowledge. Also, personally, I consider myself to be someone quite international. I was born in Venezuela, then moved to Spain. My parents have always sent me abroad during the summer. So I have a personal curiosity towards different cultures, countries, and environments. So, both from a personal and professional level, I have that curiosity. I acquired the knowledge in previous jobs. When I came to Netflix, that's the knowledge I had to apply and also educate some of my colleagues in the US specifically about what it is EMEA, right? And then, of course, specifically with regards to Netflix, we needed to do, first of all, we mostly hired people that were, we call in recruitment passive, people that weren't looking for a job. We identified the best talent in each country, and then we gave them a call to tell them, hey, Netflix has arrived to the region. Do you want to join doing this and that? So the first challenge was to approach people with a new service in the region that wasn't yet successful. It happened the same to me when Netflix called me. I didn't really know what Netflix was. Now it sounds completely absurd, but back then, Netflix was a new brand in the region. Streaming content wasn't necessarily a thing other than through piracy. So in those early conversations, the first challenge was to say, hey, Netflix is here. We're a very strong brand, etc., etc. Do you want to join? If the answer was yes, then we had to speak about relocation. And we're talking about profiles of people that they're not early on in their career. There were executive, senior employees in their jobs, and that came with asking them to leave behind a certain level of stability and also asking them to move their families. So there was a moment where we or I had to become a little bit of a jack of trades. I did recruitment, but I also spoke to the partners of the employees we wanted to recruit to make them feel comfortable with the relocation process. I had to learn about schooling options in Amsterdam for all of these people coming over, etc., etc. So it was a very enriching experience because it was not just, calling a candidate and offering them a job. It meant a life-changing moment to most of the people.
Now, for folks out there who, you know, might not be as international as your experience growing up, but they want that experience, they want to seek out those opportunities. What are ways where they can kind of raise their hand or signal that they're open to, being a bit more multicultural in their career and having those international, opportunities there?
Yes, good question, Rick. I think becoming more international starts on a personal level, right? I've seen a lot of people that can be considered very international, and I've seen a lot of people that are not international at all. Both are valid. I think you need to have the curiosity inside you to look around, ask questions, and be, open-minded enough to incorporate all of that knowledge, because you're going to see things that are really, really opposite to you, who you are, the way you've worked, etc. So curiosity to me is a must, no? And then if we think about a professional setting, if you are a part of a multinational company, I think making connections with colleagues that are in different places than you helps a lot, because it's on those, daily conversations and sharing insights that you can learn. If you are lucky enough that your company has international assignments, while it's pretty scary to suddenly move abroad, I've done it myself, I think that's the best way to put yourself in the position where you need to experience firsthand a different culture. It doesn't need to be forever, of course, but if you have the chance to spend 3-6 months somewhere else, I would encourage people to do it, because it's so enriching, not only from a professional standpoint, but also from a personal level. So with its challenges, I'm not going to say everything is easy and smooth. It's not. Anyone who's an expat or has moved abroad will understand this, but it's just a really enriching experience. And then thinking more long term, having an international background professionally, in my opinion, opens doors for your next job.
It's so wild, Mark, because when you mentioned that when you started recruiting internationally, a lot of countries and people didn't know about Netflix. And it's so hard, right, Rick, like to believe that you didn't know Netflix, because I would have thought it would be a layup to recruit for those people because, hey, it's Netflix. So how did you get people to return your calls when you were trying to recruit them when they didn't know anything about Netflix? Because that got to be pretty hard when you're, I don't want to say a startup, but like you were still early stages and people didn't know how, no one knew how this would blow up in a good way. So like,
Yes.
how were you able to do that? How were you able to kind of lure these people in and bring them aboard?
In some cases we succeeded, in others we didn't. Or in some cases I succeeded, and in other cases I failed. I just couldn't do it. No,
I
but
don't
in
believe you
general, I
failed.
think,
Come on.
well, sometimes. We can speak about failures later on. But look, no, I think in general we succeeded. I'm persuasive. People know that very well. I'm pretty persuasive. But look, I think, and this is very kind of my theory, I could translate my own experience to people, right? I was at booking, very comfortably living in Barcelona at the beach, nice salary, everything. And then this company calls me. I understand the product, but not completely, but I was absolutely hooked by its culture, right? The set of values they had, the way they thought about human resources, recruiting, compensation, all of that. And that sparked my curiosity. So I digged more into what all of this meant in my interview process, and then I trusted it was a reality, So I had a leap of faith. When speaking to other people, our first few vice presidents at Netflix or the first few directors for each country, I think the way I spoke to them about the opportunities we were offering was very genuine. I genuinely believed the product and its culture was going to be groundbreaking. And I feel, and you should ask them, I had this personal engagement with every single person I hired in the beginning. I'm a recruiter in my heart. It's the thing I love the most. I like people and I like human behavior. So if you're genuine in your message, I think you bring people along. As I said, I couldn't convince everyone, but I could convince many of them. And then on the other hand, look, it's this American company coming in, you drop the name Netflix, they start doing research, because we're talking about very smart people in the tech space or the entertainment space. The entertainment folks did know Netflix, of course. They start doing their research, they there's the trust from investors, there's all of this success in the US and so on. So I think, the combination of both this first impression they got from the company, which was probably me and the interview process, and then their own research was a kind of magic sauce to bring them on board.
And Marta, it's interesting where you're bringing these people aboard and you have to sell them on it, which is hard. But then it kind of really did, obviously, it really did well. For yourself, I believe, tell me if I'm wrong about this, that you saw your boss, when you were at Booking, shared a Harvard Business Review piece talking about Netflix. And then you saw it like, wow, this is great. And then you left and joined Netflix. Is that?
Exactly. Yeah, my boss then, her name is Anouk. She's back to Paris these days. And on a dinner during an offsite, she was like, look at this Harvard Business Review that came out called How Netflix Reinvented HR. When I read it, I just could not believe it, because I was in recruitment and in human resources, but I was someone really constantly challenging the status quo, recruiting in a too tactical way, or human resources being too programmatic or too far from the business. So when I read How Netflix Reinvented HR, I could not believe what I was reading, because someone had put in words the exact mindset I had about human resources, how strategic it should be, how companies should be more recruitment led, how you need to make an effort to pay people higher salaries if you want to access the top talent, no? So I read that, and then everything else followed, no? But it was that article that sparked my curiosity, and I think Anouk said, I think she told me, I don't remember what, she kind of regretted sharing that, no? But it was, to me, it was life-changing, right? Because it meant my whole life would change after starting to connect with Netflix.
So how did your life change? Was it just because you're on a
So
rocket
my
ship
life
now?
changed because I was in a sweet moment with Booking.com, right? The biggest European tech company, the first online travel agency that succeeded in the way they did, and so on. So I was in a sweet spot while leave. No, I had a managerial role, but when Alex, my former boss, called me and we started speaking about how real the culture was, and the expectations they had of Netflix succeeding internationally, I had to make a decision, which was one, move countries from Barcelona, good food, nice weather, to Amsterdam, but also a leap of faith in joining a company that I wasn't sure if it would succeed, and also leaving behind a managerial role and joining as an individual contributor. I joined Netflix as a recruiter because I was so fascinated by the company. So those were the main things that changed my life. And the third element was financially. Netflix is one of the most competitive brands when it comes to compensation. So that's also, I think we shy away from talking about money, but that was also an element, right? Not the decision-making factor to me, but also made a big impact in my life.
Yeah. And speaking of that, in terms of the compensation and all that, so once you were there, what was the driving factor? Because it seems like the culture there, and Rick, I'd be curious too, from what you hear on folks at Blind, because I know there are a lot of Netflix, engineers and software developers there. What's it like to work there? Is there a certain kind of person that you were looking for? Is there a certain kind of vibe? Because I've always heard there's a little bit like you have to be candid with people, and sometimes it can be very upfront, which some people, I think in Amsterdam, that's the culture. You're okay with telling people exactly it is, but other cultures, they try to smooth it out. So like Rick, Marta, like what's the vibe check of what is it like to work there?
I'd love to hear Rick, because Rick will give us the kind of what's out there on the street, no? What are people saying? Then I can give you my point of view.
Perfect.
Yes, please. I think one of the most interesting things about Netflix that people often talk about, excuse me, on Blind is that Netflix executives, they often use sports metaphors to describe the company's culture and people, right? So they use terms like, oh, we're trying to build the dream team, or they say that, they have a quote unquote keeper test where you have to earn
Mhm.
your spot on the team. You have to keep it, make sure that, you truly are the best of the best to continue to play the minutes, so to speak, or that, if you're kind of lacking or if your performance doesn't show, there's no harm in saying, hey, it's not working out. And I think for some people, when they see that kind of high performance culture talked about in that kind of almost transactional kind of way, like an athlete that
Mhm.
might, move clubs or sports teams, they get a little intimidated. Or there's a bit
Mhm.
of a mystery because I think for a lot of people, especially in the US, they're not necessarily comfortable talking about their careers in kind of that terms of competition because really that's what sport is, right? And
Yeah.
and I wonder, you know, did it seem competitive at that company? Was it a bit of a culture shock moving from Booking.com to Netflix, where you see that every day?
Yeah. Yeah. Rick, I can confirm you've heard the right things. So that box we can tick.
Yeah,
Yeah, look, let's be
yeah.
honest. I think Netflix historically has had a little bit of a reputation of being a cutthroat company. As a recruiter and as a talent leader, I've needed to have this conversation endless times. So I think we can say it. You are right. I'll speak probably less about what it is today because I'm no longer there, and I think things have changed a little bit recently. However, yes, this is the way Netflix used to talk about themselves, and I loved it, and that was one of the reasons I wanted to work there because I came from a very fraternal environment, which was Booking.com. I think any environment is valid as long as that works for the business. So this is not a critique to Booking. It was a fraternal environment in the sense that friendship was very much promoted, and we went out every Thursday and every Friday, and these super big parties and the swag and the presents, and it was fraternal, right? So part of the idea of teams being successful is if teams were connected in that way. That worked for me for a while, but then maybe I became too old. I don't know, or I matured, and I started feeling that was probably not the right environment for me. And I liked how transparent Netflix was in the sense of we are not a family, we are a team. That stuck in my mind. I was like, oh my god, yes, thank you, because some companies pretend to be a family, but the reality is that in a company you end up either leaving or firing. You have a conflict and competition, and sometimes politics, and sometimes bureaucracy, and that doesn't really happen in a real family. I would never fire my sister, right? So I like the transparency of Netflix of naming things as I understood them too, right? To me, a company is a team and not a family. I think early on there was a lot of sports analogies, but that didn't work for many people. So we moved to describing it or to using the analogy of a jazz band. In a band, in a music band, you need everyone for the sound to come out properly and be entertaining. If one doesn't play, I mean, if they play bad, of course, but if they don't play as well as the rest, maybe you need to replace them. And that in my mind is totally fine to say it. Expecting high performance, right? Also fair in my eyes when I joined Netflix, because if you're offering the 90th percentile in compensation, then the expectation when it comes to performance it's gonna be high, and no one is gonna sugarcoat the consequence of poor performance, right? We will be they used to say, we're going to be honest with you, Marta, in case you're not performing, and we think about the severance and move on, right? So there's high degree of honesty, in my opinion, in speaking about a company like this. So I felt drawn to it. That said, I completely understand this level of candor and honesty and directness is not for everyone. And I used to tell people all the time, and I think it's good, that Netflix is not for everyone. Like, not every company is for everyone. I could say the same about booking.com or about any other competitor in both industries. So when thinking about working for a company, Netflix or any other company, I think we all as a candidate need to be true to ourselves in what's the environment we want. Is it a high performing environment that can have some traits of competition, or do we want a more fraternal place where it's less direct and maybe softer in the way of communicating with each other? My preference is a place where things are said directly, where the cornerstone of performance is feedback. I don't necessarily believe in performance reviews and OKRs and scores. So I needed a place that had that mindset, but other people perform better with a quarterly performance review, with a clear OKR or KPI. So I think, it's good to have options out there. I think it's good that companies are very honest about their values, and then candidates can make a choice, right? And I also want to validate the feelings of intimidation or feeling intimidated, because it does come across as a little shocking in the beginning. I remember when Erin Meyer interviewed me for the No Rules book, they used me as an example of imposter syndrome, because I was all the time thinking the rest were better than me, right? I think it was a kind of healthy imposter syndrome somehow, because it kept me very alert. But yes, come on, when you are working with the top-notch talent of an industry, it does feel intimidating. The company just needs to make sure there are systems in place to support you during those early times or onboarding days, right? So yeah, sorry about the long-winded answer, but I think this is a really hot topic. Has always been and will always be.
It is such an interesting topic, like Rick, right? To me, I'll be very honest, I would probably feel uncomfortable in an environment where I feel at any one time they can say, "Yep, Jack, you're out of here," and just be very blunt and say that,
Mm.
without any empathy or any really, care.
But
Like that's
Jack, with that, sorry I interrupt you, but
yeah.
it didn't really happen like that.
Oh, okay.
It's not out of the blue, suddenly you're asked to leave. Absolutely not. What I saw during the time I was there, and again, I can't speak less about what's going on today, but during the time I was there, and I myself had to at some point reduce my team or have poor performance conversations, I think it was a gradual process where we had the responsibility as leaders to provide constant feedback. Should never be a surprise. Constant feedback, consistent feedback, feedback that will help the person overcome the challenges, to then make a decision. And I think you can be very honest. I consider myself to be an honest and direct person, and at the same time be compassionate and empathetic. So Rick, you asked before, does Netflix or Booking look for a specific person? I think both companies do. In the case of Netflix, is this type of leader that can be focused, direct, honest, you know, very agile with feedback, but at the same time compassionate and empathetic. So the out of the blue idea, while I'm sure it happens sometimes and not all cases are perfect, my experience is that we all invested a ton of time in making sure clear feedback is in place for a period of time, right?
I mean, as you're building a team internationally, how do you kind of navigate kind of not necessarily copying and pasting the culture from another country or another geography or another kind of part of the company to these newer parts of the business or these new markets or new countries? How does that
Mhm.
necessarily work, and how do you really like make sure that you're kind of being the best bearer of culture as you
Yeah.
move abroad or as you grow?
Yeah, that's such a good question, Rick. And I honestly think no one has ever been able to answer it properly, but I'm going to give it a try. Look, one of the things we all had in mind, especially in the first few years with this level of newness, it was a new brand, new culture with a ton of new employees that didn't really know what they were doing, but they were having a lot of fun. No? So one of the things we kept in mind, not always kept in mind, but as we were 1 year into these international markets, how do you make sure you adapt um, a very US centric culture, which was the Netflix culture, both from a business standpoint because of the streaming and Hollywood and all of that, Silicon Valley, the tech side, and then the set of values that were quite American when I joined, right? Then the culture had an evolution and so on, right? We very early on thought we need to have some sort of mechanism or at least awareness to adapt all things to these new cultures and countries, right? Because when I called people in Spain, for example, which is my own culture, but also Italy, Germany, um, uh, anywhere, and we spoke about all of these elements, it was shocking. It was very, very new. So we started kind of incorporating in our mindset. I don't think we did anything specific or we said anything specific, but we started incorporating way more awareness of what this all meant to different people, you know, because it was shocking. Also, the financial element of it, right? Talking about the keeper's test so openly. That was one that for many people that came from maybe a little bit more traditional markets like Spain, in my case, we just invested more time in making sure we were setting the right expectations and getting into as many details as necessary about the business, the technology, and the culture for people to understand, right? And to feel comfortable taking the leap of faith we were talking about earlier.
Now, you spent your entire career in international recruitment. Have you learned anything curious or interesting tidbits about certain cultures or business practices? Kind of putting yourself in the shoes of the candidates that you're speaking to, how some things
Yeah,
they found quite novel or interesting. Was there anything that you
yeah.
noticed from the business side?
Well, every day was a learning. I just think that's what has kept me going for so long. No, I'm just fascinated, and I've recruited a lot in many countries like Spain and Italy, and all the time you discover something new. To me, what was a huge learning is um, I think at booking, I quickly got used, or the candidates quickly got used about how we spoke about the culture because it was not more simple, but in a way because it was more fraternal, and we looked for a talent that was earlier on in their careers. It was easier that transition from any other place to booking, right? At Netflix, what I realized is that things that I took absolutely for granted, like the understanding of we are not a family, but we're a team, for certain cultures that might have the family as a central thing in society, and I can speak about Spain again, but it's also Portugal and Italy and Greece and all of that, that didn't sound great. So going an extra mile to make sure you empathize while you remain kind of a representative of the company, you put yourself in the shoes of the other person, no? um, I don't know, and then more like day-to-day things like understanding holidays in each country. When you work for such a big diverse region, almost every month of the year is either a holiday or a festivity that can be religious or not in each country, and that's something you need to understand, no? Or time zones, or when to talk to people. It's so layered, um, working for a varied region that, yeah.
Now you've worked on the recruiting agency side, you've become an executive at Booking. certainly at Netflix. What has been the most challenging promotion or career milestone that you've earned? How do you think you managed to accomplish that feat looking back now?
I'm going to give you two examples that I really like or I feel proud of, okay? I know it's one, but I don't like rules very much, so I'm going to do two. My first milestone that I have thought about it more recently than when it actually happened is that when I graduated at school, I did psychology. I was really obsessed with becoming a headhunter. This was many months ago. LinkedIn didn't even exist back then, so imagine what I'm talking about. I identified this small agency called IHR in Madrid, owned by a French guy, actually. And I identified it as kind of the only place I could think of that could hire a fresh graduate to do headhunting, because I wanted to do this thing of cold calling candidates to offer them jobs. So I applied to one of their jobs. I went through a kind of weird recruiting process, to be honest, several interviews, and then they did this super long psychological test. I was there for 3 hours, and then they called me and they said no. And I was like, but why? I really don't understand why I did wrong. And they said that they trusted psychological test a lot. And the test kind of indicated I would be bored in the job. I don't know why they said that. And I said, I do not accept this. Please hire me. I really, really want to do this. And if I'm bored or you don't like me, we always have the chance to kind of, I'll say goodbye, or you can fire me, but please hire me, because I need to learn this craft, or whatever I thought about was headhunting then. And they did. And I will be forever grateful for hiring me and kind of allowing me to be so stubborn, because I learned so much there, and I confirmed my passion for the work I've been doing since then, right? So that to me was like, that stubbornness is good, The other milestone, and those were scary times. I got promoted to lead the talent acquisition team at Netflix early on in the pandemic. That was rough, because I became the leader of a pretty big team at very uncertain times. And I remember those moments of being at my place alone. Obviously, we couldn't go anywhere. And then seeing a huge, like the screen with a million little boxes, which was everyone in my team. And I was like, oh my God, this is now, I'm responsible of all of these people now in the middle of a pandemic. I can't see them. I'm very, like, I'm energetic and passionate, and I move my hands. I can't see them. I can't like connect in person with them. How am I ever gonna succeed as a leader of this team in these circumstances? No, I was so scared for so long. I had to do virtual offsites. I had to give feedback over VC. I continued being, the bridge between the US and EMEA. So all of that was rough. I really thought I wasn't going to succeed, but I did. So that makes me very proud. I think that was a big milestone. And I say kudos to anyone who got promoted to anything during COVID, because that was rough. Yeah.
I mean, pulling on that thread a little bit, now that it seems like we're a bit over the other side of the pandemic, how has it changed international recruiting? How has it changed, you know, business cultures worldwide, COVID-19, the pandemic?
Mhm. I think it's changed a lot for the good and also for the bad. Let's be honest. I feel we are still going through the right sizing of many companies that overhired pre and during COVID, right? So we're seeing a lot of layoffs. Some are visible and out there, others are silent, but there's a lot of exits going on at the moment. So that's more of the negatives, right? I think there's a silver lining, which is executives in companies and CEOs and investors will take probably more seriously over hiring in the future. I think there's an opportunity to make sure you keep companies at the right size for some time. So that's the negative. No, we continue seeing the consequences, which means the labor markets everywhere globally are tough at the moment. There's a lot of supply of talent, but there's not that much demand, right? If I make a ranking, I think the US is probably in the worst place. I am seeing a lot of my ex-colleagues and friends and so on struggling to find a job, whereas I see Western Europe in a slightly better place, maybe because layoffs have been less. And then I think Asia Pacific, it's probably in the middle, no? And then any emerging market, hard to tell, right? Because we have less insights. But yeah, I think that's a rough patch we will all need to go through. On the positive side of things, I think, you know, the corporate world evolves slowly, and it takes kind of the invention of the internet or the invention of something to kind of shake things up, right? And change how things are done. I think COVID was an accelerated evolution of how companies think about doing business. And I think when it comes to people, which is my domain at the end of the day, the combination of having gone through a pandemic, but the newer generations having very different expectations of employers makes it very interesting, because things like hybrid type of working, which is something everybody's still figuring out. The world is becoming more focused on making sure things are inclusive. Then I see these newer generations expecting true commitment, you know, which is something very, very different to my generation. So I think things are changing, and they're having a positive trend when it comes to innovation in the workplace and true commitment to what matters.
Marta, I just want to go back a little bit when you're saying, and I really appreciate you talking about here in the US because it is tough.
It's
It's
very
kind of
tough.
like a white
Yeah.
collar recession almost, or
Mhm.
there's a term rich session where for middle to senior level folks, they're having a really hard time finding people. I'm glad
Yeah.
you brought it up. Now, what do you do? Like, what would you recommend? Because you have all this experience for somebody who is in a place, it doesn't have to be Netflix, but let's say like Netflix, where you have this radical candor kind of thing. But let's also say now you add on to it that you're worried about layoffs, you're worried about keeping your job. What would you say to some, you know, particularly young people? Like, what can they do to hold on to their job or even just try to move forward in this kind of environment? And not even young people, for any kind of person, because I think most people are a little concerned, right? Like Rick, I see on Blind, a lot of people are worried. You know, they're making a lot of money, they're doing really well, but they feel they're one step away that the rug could be pulled out from under them. Is there advice you could say to make, you know, from everything you've learned, to make them feel invaluable, that they, you know, they're irreplaceable? Can you maybe give some insights for people?
Yes. Look, that's a tough one, right?
Yeah.
Because as I said earlier, I believe in the notion of companies are a business, a team, and not a family, right? So I think some sort of notion like that needs to be internalized by all of us, right? It's hard to expect, especially when you're mid to senior level of experience, that you're gonna be protected forever or irreplaceable, right? What I'd say is that I think we all need to be very grateful to what we have, but also understand that times change, right? When you are too rigid, when it comes to the ability to adapt to new environments, I think that's the beginning of the frustration, no? So if you're looking around and things are tough, be very happy with having a job and be grateful, have a fat salary. If that changed, in my opinion, the magic word is trade-offs, right? I think we individually need to adjust our expectations of what the labor market is compared to what it was. The FANG companies or Silicon Valley or tech unicorns and so on, I think times have changed. And we need to, in my opinion, be mature enough to understand the shift and ask ourselves, and this is a very kind of personal introspection exercise, what are the trade-offs we're willing to do to make sure we remain active in the job market, right? You could potentially take a little bit of a step back when it comes to hierarchy, or you could take a little bit of a step back when it comes to salary expectations. You could become a little bit more flexible and try another industry. You might love, I don't know, pharmaceutical, but if there's nothing available, let's open our mind and think about, you might want a permanent job, but you just find temporary contracts. Why not? Let's try it. You might want 5 days a week, but you get this opportunity for 2 days a week because now post-COVID, this happens, right? So I think us getting comfortable with the ideas of making trade-offs to continue being active in the job markets is important. I see the struggle is real. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to undermine the problems that there are. But on the other hand, I also see some people not wanting to give up a certain status. And times have changed. That's a reality.
No, I love that advice because so many people going through this, they need to hear it. And I really appreciate you sharing it for the audience because a lot of people are struggling. So they need this kind of advice.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, in that spirit, as we kind of wrap up our time together, do you have any last bits of advice for people that are thinking international, that are thinking more multicultural in their career?
Yeah. Try it. My advice is if you have it in your mind and you're hesitating, do it. What can happen? You can always turn around and go back. I'm going to tell you, when I was in Barcelona, as I said, very comfortable with my job. I got the Netflix job offer. I told my best friend, I'm so scared. I don't know what to do because what if I fail? And she looked at me and she said, if you fail, you will go to the airport, grab a plane, and come back home. It's as simple as that. I know it's easier said than done because back then, I didn't have any other responsibility than my job. But look, if you have this in your mind, do it because we only have one life, and it's so cool to experiment. You're gonna learn something for sure. Maybe if you come to Amsterdam, you're gonna hate it because it's raining all day, but you're gonna learn something for sure. So I'd say try it. Yeah. And if I can help you in any way on this side of the world, I'd be happy to.
I love that reminder. Thank you for leaving us on such a positive note, Marta.
Thank you.
Thanks.